All right. So just as a brief reminder, so the purpose of today's coffee chat is just to kind of informally have a chance for students to get to learn more about you and ways that they can form a relationship with you, that they can be successful in your courses and get the most out of the experience of having a class with you.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So the first question I always like to ask is, what got you interested in teaching biology? What got you interested in the subject itself?
Well, first of all, I want to correct you. I teach chemistry. So.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
That's all good.
I apologize.
It's all good.
I'll try that again. So
I love biology, by the way. I love biology. Biology was one subject I always liked in high school. But I switched to chemistry. My passion went to chemistry as my main major. So
I apologize.
No problem.
So what got you interested in chemistry? Let's start with that as a subject before we get into what got you interested in teaching it.
So, I had high school was a turning point for me about which subject I really want to be pursuing a career. So I had biology, which we talked about it, and going toward the pre-med track. So that was one passion of mine. But my passion started really, from learning about chemistry in high school, where I started absorbing the materials. I started, seeing how chemistry is in our daily life, and that's why I even project in my teaching relate topics we cover in general chemistry to our daily life. So started in high school.
Very cool. And then, so what got you interested in teaching as a kind of a subset of what you could do with chemistry?
I was put in a kind of a career pathway from college. So I was in the Faculty of Science. I was majoring in chemistry, and I was in the top of my class. So it's kind of put you on that kind of box that that you'll be hired to be a teaching assistant. And so I had two options at that moment. Once I graduated from college, I was a top in my class. So I either had to pursue as a teaching assistant, and teaching assistants, I'm originally from Egypt. So teaching assistants is a job. It's an actual job. You got hired, and which is here still is a job, but it's a job on a needed basis, right? Every semester. You get the letter for your admission here as a PhD student, and part of your admission is your support as a teaching assistant or research assistant. In my case, this was a full-time, teaching assistants that you're going to be also doing research. So you pursued research as well. And I had the other option, which is industry, working in a petroleum company. You will make more, again, financially.
Yeah.
Comparing academia to industry, you can see the difference in terms of income and resources. But my real passion was about teaching and research. So I choose that over working in industry. So
very cool. So it's interesting that you have such a different perspective, I guess, on what you can do with chemistry and kind of where school would take you versus at VCU. It's like you can be in chemistry and then go into a variety of fields at VCU. For students who are kind of taking your course and not really sure what they want to do with chemistry, what would you suggest that they do while they're in your course to kind of explore that interest or to try to deepen that interest in chemistry?
Yeah, first of all, they have to have an open mind about the subject itself. Sometimes you're coming into chemistry not liking it. That's number one. And that is a barrier. Putting barriers or walls, what it does is just basically will make you actually not even enjoying the subject itself. So what I try to do in my class is to try to break the barriers as much as possible to the students that, have an open mind about the subject. Chemistry is hard, but have an open mind about it. It's in our daily life. It's around us. Whatever you do in the kitchen is chemistry. Our body is functioning by biochemical reactions right now. So, again, this is one of, biology, physics, and chemistry. These are triangle, and you have the math that basically collide with all of them. particular physics and chemistry. And, these are important to basically just grow as you study multiple classes at VCU. So I try to have this built-in discussion with the students about how important what we're doing is, and just have an open mind about it. And believe me, it does help, because I have students come back to me and says, well, I like your class, I really learn from your class, and I'm now actually going to be a chemistry major, or a biology chemistry major, or a double major, with minor in chemistry. So it does help, trying to break any barriers. And, as I said, putting barriers because you don't like the subject or you heard about it, it's kind of it's hold you back.
Absolutely. So kind of going off of that, as well as when I was listening to your first response about, being at the top of your class, what suggestions do you have for students to be successful in your course? Do you see certain resources that are regularly used, or certain study strategies that you have found consistently have helped students in your class get the grades that they're hoping to get?
Definitely. Definitely. So, being in the top is very hard,
Yeah.
Being that level require commitment, require time commitment, require energy commitment. And again, and that's why I tell my students, try to be proactive. If you something you don't understand, try to reach out to the instructor, try to, see the instructor in office hours, or seek additional help. There are multiple resources available on VCU, the online, the campus, learning center provide free tutoring, you can drop by. Now everything online, they still provide that in an online format. So either in person or online, try to see any resources that are available to you, and also it's free. So you don't have a financial burden from trying to seek help. Also SI sessions, that's also provided and incorporated in the courses. So I try to tell them to seek all of this, but the most important is your commitment. You have to have the commitment to do all of this, because if you don't have that commitment and you can leave everything to the last minute, it becomes very difficult to keep up with the content. And this is like my first lecture is how to succeed in my class. And I give them this 1.23, checklist that you have to make sure that you attending class is very important. And when you attend and interact, ask questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions. I made my classes as a friendly environment. The students can ask any questions and I will be more than happy to answer it. So having that transparency from the beginning, the students can ask questions and you will able to respond back to them and help them with their questions. That kind of break any barriers. Again, you're trying to break barriers that can hinder student success.
So going off of part of what you were just talking about with students being proactive, I know a lot of students might come into a course, think that they have the study skills that they need, and then they find after the first test or so on that they didn't quite get it right. For those students that are struggling initially, but that they want to catch up and be successful in your class, are there certain things that you think that are useful for them to be trying to change to get better? Is it usually just a matter of putting in more time, or is it like a strategy that you see for those students to catch back up?
Yeah, it's putting more time. It's a strategy, but the point is you can have two students. One student can put 2 hours and he will catch the content in that 2 hours and will grasp the content in 2 hours. And another student will put 5 hours or 6 hours. It is the way you approach the content. And the way, and again, as you said, some students will come with, thinking that they have all the resources or, carrying out from high school into college. But there are other aspects of not just being in the class environment, being in a college environment. Being now no longer, dependent 100% on your teacher. You have like 90% responsibility on you to do the work.
Yeah.
So this is what I remind always the students is, you have to make sure that you contact your instructor, see the instructor in office hours. If your first exam was very low, you got very low grade, we have drop policies. So, there is a catch up. You can catch, even though if your first exam was very low, that can be dropped and replaced, by the final exams. It's one of our policy. Or we can have 4 midterm exams and we'll drop the lowest. So there are catch up policies. And I'm sure in any courses, not just chemistry, there is this kind of, embedded policy. So the first exam is the one that's basically, that should be a wake-up call. So this is how I always tell my students, should be a wake-up call. You should try to see the instructor, see how you're approaching the content, see how you're studying. Maybe what you're doing is not working, even though if you're spending 10 hours. I said time could not be the solution. Okay, so I get a low scoring exam 1, I put 10 hours, no, I'm gonna put 20 hours. That's not gonna be, it is how you manage that time. And you manage the resources available to you. Sometimes there's live distraction, like I said, there's not just, the course itself. So
quality and quantity.
Yes. So my always advice to my students is see me during my office hours if you need any help, because again, we are not a psychic. I cannot, I have numbers in front of me, right?
Yeah.
At the end, if you don't really communicate with me and try to work a strategy out, and that's where the advising comes as well. So advising is a very important tool as well for the success. So, yeah.
So you've mentioned your office hours a couple of times. So, I know that students sometimes are a little hesitant to come into office hours. They're not always sure if their question is large enough to take up your time. What do you find as the barrier of, like, this is when you should come in and see me? Does it have to be class related? Does it have to be I'm struggling with something, or what do you like students to come in to see you about for your office hours?
Well, I welcome any students to show up to my office hours. Right now we're in online format and this is kind of limiting, but I have my classes online are all synchronous. So all my classes, I am there for the students. I answer their questions. We go over interactions, so live interactions. So I have live recordings. And, believe me, it has been, I enjoyed in this kind of pandemic that we're living in. Like I always tell my students, I feel like I'm stuck in a computer for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And the students have the live recordings available to them after that. So afterward, they can go and revisit the live recordings. So they have the chance to directly interact with me during the class time. And also they can revisit this live recordings and they can basically timestamp certain content that they want to go over. And then I also have outside, another office hours, different time format. And I always tell them, if this doesn't work, email me, we'll set up a time that will work for both of us. So I try to break any barriers, but as I said, at the end, it's an online format, and it is difficult than just dropping by your office.
Yeah.
But I have to make myself accessible, regardless if it's an online or in person. And I have to always, reiterate on how important, if you're struggling, is to need to, seek help. So regardless of what's the outcome is, because I always have, if I moved 20%, or 30%, by keep saying that, that's a success. Than not saying anything, and and that's always helped. I always, my students, as I said, they enjoy my live recordings that I do right now, and I always get feedback from them. I always tell them, you're gonna get bored from me keep saying, is everybody following me? Is everybody liking my teaching style? I'd like to have a feedback from you, because instructions is not just me coming with 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what I need to do right now. And I need to catch up. I need to speed up because I'm not at 4 yet. I'm at 2. No, what is the outcome from this subject? What is the outcome? Do you understand what we're doing or not? Are you following what we're doing or not? And again, you're trying to reach the broader audience. I'm not just coming to this live recording for the one that's prepared. I'm coming here to make everybody at the same level.
Yeah.
So I repeat content if needed to, because some students are not understanding that content. And some other students could be bored because they heard it before, but again, I communicate with everybody and say, this is for everybody. I'm here to make sure everybody succeeds. So
That's great.
this is my strategy, my teaching style. So.
That's awesome. Kind of going off of some things you said. So, you know, some students that I know that I met when I was in career services are kind of on the very ambitious side of being in chemistry, you know, being pre-medical or pre-health or wanting to go to grad school in chemistry, and they want to form a relationship with you, right? They want maybe to look into research opportunities in your department, or they want a letter of recommendation from you because they've really enjoyed your class. What do you recommend they do to help you feel comfortable giving them a letter of recommendation or trying to get them an opportunity on campus or off campus? What can they do proactively to make you comfortable with that?
Definitely, this is bring me joy to try to help my students, and I'm myself. I was students one time.
Yeah.
I got the help from my professors to be where I am right now. So it is, again, it is paid forward. And when you think about it, you're trying to basically, so having a good communication with your professor, so this is just to answer your question, having a good communication with your professor, making sure your professor is updated with your progress, even after he finish his class, having contact, just an email every semester saying, you know, this is my progress so far, and this is why I'm, you know, having this kind of, you know, again, as I said, bring me joy to have an email from my students saying I was accepted in, you know, George Washington Medical School. I was accepted in, you know, I'm in a waiting list at VCU Medical School. Just bring joy to me that I was part of this process and I was able to, you know, help them advance in their career as I was helped, you know, when I was basically, you know, applying for or advancing in my career. So it does, you know, and as I said, sometimes it's will hinder a shy student, you know, that could be very good, but you have that again, you know, social, you know, interactions. So in this case, just a simple email, your instructor, your professor, every semester about how your progress. You went to an internship, or you know, you're doing community engagements, things like that. Just you know, we'll get that, you know, we'll get just this lifeline going, you know. So
Yeah, just something more than just being in the class itself.
exactly, because that will help when the, you know, professor is writing a recommendation letter, because, you know, one thing that you always have to click on, how well you know the students, and does that matter? Does that matter if you said well, very well versus, you know, no interaction? So it does matter.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I feel like as a student myself, I never appreciated that, you know, especially what letter recommendation process looks like now. It is very much like a, how well do you know this student? I don't think students always realize that you have to click a button of like, hey, I may not know this student very well. I'm happy to write a letter. I just don't have a lot to say because they never really talked with me.
Exactly. And that's why, you know, as I said, like, especially with the general you know, chemistry courses, you know, you met the students in their freshman year, like as a Chem 101 or Chem 102. And then like 2-3 years later, the students like contacting you, want a recommendation letter from you. So this is, you know, and, you know, if you're, again, like I have students so far that has been communicating with me and coming to my office, you know, until they're graduating. And, you know, and as I said, just, as I said, if you're a shy student, and you don't have to be doing that, but at least, you know, you can, you know, simply just break that barrier by just simply emailing the professor, you know, every semester. It doesn't have to be like every week, just basically every semester. Here's what I'm doing right now. I finished my Orgo class. I get an A, and you know, I cannot, you know, just a simple email, just progress about what, you know, because I said it doesn't matter when you're writing a recommendation. Is you have to just click certain, you know, certain criteria as you writing the recommendation. Not all recommendation, just a reference letter. Some recommendation you have to fill a form, you know, and some of these forms are bullets you have to fill, you know, and so.
Great. Oh, I appreciate that insight. It's been really refreshing to hear from the different faculty that I've talked to, how you all are just looking for these relationships that students want to form with you, so that you can just learn how what you're teaching them is a part of what they're growing into as an adult and a professional, and all of that kind of stuff. So one quick question I had, and this is kind of going back a little bit in our conversation, is you mentioned that you had a test that can be dropped throughout the semester. I know at VCU, a lot of our students have other things happening. Either they're working part-time or full-time. They have, family needs, or they're commuting. And so a lot of times life comes up. How do you deal with when students ask for flexibility with something? Is there a mechanism already in place? Is it something that's just individual to each student depending on their situation? How do you handle those things that happen in life with our students?
Well, again, when it comes to that subject, this is a very important point. And excuse me, for us in chemistry department, we in the general chemistry, we teach about 2,000 students. For Chem 101, about 2,000 plus per year. And looking into the policy for the courses, this is basically used across all the instructor teaching general chemistry. Mm-hmm. So, and we agreed to that drop policy. So, having that replacement, so there's no makeup. Just to answer your question, there's no makeup. And because we have that drop policy, life can happen anytime. Yeah. Emergency can happen anytime. And so we have 4 midterm exams. So this is one of the policies, 4 midterm exam, and we'll drop the lowest. Mm-hmm. So you grade it out of 3. And this 4 midterm exam are spread over the semester. It's not like every week. Okay. So, and if something happened, again, some other events such as hospitalization that is serious, that you basically have a longer, not just like a week, you have 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And, this is different circumstances. I'm looking at, like something happened, you missed that exam. Yeah. But for long term, this is a different approach. So it's evaluated based on how serious is basically the emergency. And also have again, as I said, things in place that we drop the lowest quiz. So not just the exams is being dropped, the quizzes dropped, as well as also for homework. So this policy is being applied across the board. It's not just applied only on the exams. Okay. And, but as I said, this is when you teach a 2,000 students, like for example, in the fall, I have 300 students in my courses, Chem 101 and Chem 102, about 590 students. Like my Zoom last fall was 282. Wow. The max 300, and I had 282. I was like, where is this gonna crash? So luckily, nothing happened, but imagine that. So imagine we were giving an exams in person, and you have 50% show up to the exam or 90% show up to the exam. That means 10% had an emergency. That means about 32 students or about 30 students that you have to give them a makeup. This is just for that particular event. And imagine this is happening in exam 2 and exam 3. You will be giving makeup until the end of the semester to find the right time, to find the right resources. So having that drop policy kind of help with this, then making every exam count, and at the same time, every exam counts, you have that makeup policy that's being applied. And then you will have to make an exam for every, because your exam is already revealed. So you have to make another exam that equivalent to that exam. Yeah. So, I've been working at VCU for 8 years as an assistant professor. I actually promoted this semester to associate professor. Congrats. Thank you very much. And, and I see that what we're doing, it's working. And as I said, there are other alternatives, mm-hmm. basically going through the testing DSS. So if a student has disability, they have their own, this is again, their own regulations. But I'm talking about, not going through disability or VCU athletes. Also, all the protection that's put under for VCU athletes, for military reserve and active, all of this is basically, I'm not about this. I'm talking about just the general policy.
Yeah, great.
I wanted to make this point very clear that this policy is for the general students. The other that's being protected under VCU guidelines and under the law. This is, something we have to follow.
Great. I appreciate that clarification because it is important to know that, there are certain VCU populations that have their own set of rules from
Exactly.
the general population.
Exactly.
Then my last question for you today is, how would you like your students to perceive you as, their professor going into this next semester? And so,
can you repeat the question again?
yeah, how would you like your students to perceive you? How would you want them to think of you as?
Yeah, so basically, as I said, at the beginning of beginning of our meeting here, I'm always say live recording because I've been recording for a long time.
Sure.
So basically, I want them to think of me as somebody who's trying to help everybody succeed. I want them to think of me as somebody who's willing to help everybody to the maximum of my ability, and providing the highest instructions as possible, either in a virtual format or an in-person format. And I use the tools available to me in terms of virtual, as well as in person. I use multiple style of instructions, not just a PowerPoint. I use, again, doc camera to break down everything, because chemistry is a hard subject.
Yeah.
I tell my students, again, is to come out with open mind about chemistry and just think about it. I had students who emailed me saying that understanding how to balance chemical reaction changed the way they think about chemistry. Just, from your perspective as an instructor, you don't think that balancing chemical reaction will be such a burden.
Yeah.
But you are looking from your perspective as an instructor. You always have to look from the student perspective. And so explaining things that could be very simple to others, that's not necessarily is simple to somebody else. And this is what my teaching style is. I come with one mind, is I want to help everybody. And I want everybody to succeed.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me for today's Science Hub Coffee Chat. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for the